Hey there, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. And I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. The EduData podcast is your no fluff guide to the data driving higher education. Forget about data silos and disconnected stacks. Timothy Davis and Jamie Boggs, two of Element 451's data analysis experts, bring you straight into the heart of the numbers that matter. With sharp commentary and rigorous research, our hosts break down complex data points and actionable insights you can use. Whether you're an administrator, educator, or just a higher ed enthusiast, EduData is your key to unlocking the data behind academia. New episodes drop every Friday morning, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the EduData podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Mastering the Next, a cutting-edge podcast that explores the future of graduate, online, and non-traditional education through the lens of AI and technology. I'm your host, Dr. Ray Lutsky, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Element 451. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the thought leaders shaping the future of graduate enrollment management through technology. Mastering the Next is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that helps institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to Mastering the Next. I'm Dr. Ray Lutsky. Today on the pod, how an accomplished university president, now on his third presidency, views the relationship between graduate education and technology. Dr. Joseph Bertolino, affectionately known as President Joe to his students at Stockton University, previously served as president of Southern Connecticut State University and Linden State College, and he joins me now. Welcome to the pod, President Joe.
Great to see you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm so glad to have you here. It's so
Thank
good
you.
to see
Thank you
you.
very much. Appreciate it.
President Joe, given your impressive vantage point in higher education over your career, tell me, what's the next thing in graduate education, and how do you see technology fitting in?
I think graduate education and technology change so rapidly that I think it's hard to determine what is coming next. I mean, if you had asked me a couple years ago where we would be with AI and where it is headed, and those are the conversations that we would be engaged in at the university level, I don't think anybody was really thinking very much about it. Now we are finding ourselves being reactive as institutions to AI and trying to figure out, okay, how do we fit our curriculum and our daily work as a university into this technology, and what kind of model should we be shaping? When I think of graduate education, it's about flexibility, and it will always be about flexibility, particularly in a post pandemic world. There was always this pre pandemic conversation around how do we develop graduate programs that are user friendly and that are virtual and also provide for some face to face. Um, I and some institutions took to that really well, others not so well. I think the pandemic changed all of that. The ground rules are different now, both in graduate education and, quite frankly, in undergraduate education. You don't have a choice but to provide maximum flexibility across all platforms, whatever those platforms may be. Where that will lead, I'm not entirely sure. But clearly, what we're seeing at a place like Stockton, is primarily focused on the health sciences. Given an aging population, a change in demographics, a great deal of our time is spent in the health sciences and then utilizing technology in health science graduate programs.
I'd love to just double click on that for a second because that's a really interesting point. So, could you describe what some of the challenges might have been in integrating technology into the health sciences, specifically at Stockton? Like, for example, I assume you're talking about online learning.
Well, yes, it's expensive. It's expensive, and the technology is complex and requires highly trained individuals because we're not just talking about online learning per se and the platforms to engage in a virtual classroom. We're talking about uh, labs, we're talking about clinicals, we're talking about the ability to virtually interact with patients and clients. How does one navigate all of that? So, from a university perspective, the technology required to do all of that is substantial. So, for example, if I were to have a nursing program that was almost entirely virtual, you could do the traditional classroom work online. But navigating, and I don't know what the different platforms are to be perfectly candid, but navigating the platforms for labs and other types of uh, clinicals require levels of technology that most of our faculty are not trained to use. And so, even before we get to a place where we can have students use the technology, we have to be able to use the technology. Now, the simulation labs, I think, are a great example, but you still have to be physically present in some way to experience a simulation lab. It just means that we don't need to go to a hospital. We don't need to find a clinical site because the clinical site is virtual and it's here on our campus. Um, but again, those are very expensive ventures. Exciting, especially when you see them in action, and exciting for our students, and exciting that our students are learning the technology that they will probably use in their field regardless. What we are finding is the two biggest challenges: one, cost, particularly for a public regional, and two, trained personnel and trained faculty, not just in the technology piece, but finding trained faculty, period. It is very challenging to find nursing faculty, social work faculty, PT, occupational therapy. It's a challenge.
That's interesting too, and I can imagine. I mean, it's really great for your students to have the ability to really gain those skills that will help them in their careers and help justify the value of the degree. Thinking broadly from your work at Lyndon State, from Southern Connecticut State University, from Stockton, it must be a challenge to balance the traditional aspects of graduate education with all these changes, the integration of technology, the needs of working adult learners. How have you seen that evolving, or how have you addressed that?
Graduate education is exploding in a number of professions. While we are seeing a decline in undergraduate students, we are seeing an increase in graduate students. Again, particularly in the health sciences and on the business front, but on the business front connected to health sciences, which is interesting. So, hospital administration, for example, healthcare administration. Um, I think that there's no magic, there's no silver bullet here. Okay. Um, I continue to encourage faculty to create a curriculum that is built around, again, flexibility, utilizing as much technology as you possibly can, allowing people to get their degrees on their own timeline and within their own schedule from virtually anywhere, while at the same time trying to create cohorts of learners that can share their experiences and work with one another, because non-traditional students will benefit most by partnering with other non-traditional students who are going through like experiences. Part of the conversation in the educational experience becomes, well, how are you managing this course, or how are you managing um, this curriculum while balancing the rest of your life? And so there's a sharing that happens in those cohorts, and it's much easier, I think, for someone who, I mean, when I think of my own graduate experience, everybody was working. I went to graduate school for 7 years part-time at Columbia. And so I remember sitting with my classmates who were also my work colleagues, whether it was at my place of employment or elsewhere, and we had similar experiences. And what that does is it also informs the work that we are doing in the graduate program and the lens by which we view our work and the curriculum. You can build a cohort virtually. You can build a very strong cohort virtually. Pre-COVID, I would have said that was more challenging. Post-pandemic, folks would prefer to be on Zoom. Folks are used to communicating on a virtual platform. Folks are used to socializing on a virtual platform now. And so, from my perspective, our faculty who have now actually become more comfortable with a virtual platform, which is also very interesting to see from my lens, having served as a president at 3 institutions, the resistance to do anything virtual was very, very strong pre-pandemic. Now, more often than not, folks are asking, well, can I just go virtual? No, I actually need you to spend some face-to-face real person time with some folks. Okay. So the pendulum has actually swung the other way. I would contend that as leaders in the graduate education sector and the technology center, how do we move the pendulum to the center that allows for this balance? I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
Well, let me ask off of that. That's really interesting. So there's this term non-traditional education. Given that, what does that mean for the idea of a non-traditional student? Does that even exist anymore? What is that?
One could argue that there's no longer a non-traditional education because everything's been non-traditional. And since higher education is at a crossroads, the question becomes, well, what is traditional now? We are redefining what higher education is and needs to be, especially during a time where the value of higher education has been called into question and is being challenged in terms of the return on investment. So I do think that there is still the non-traditional 18 to 24-year-old student, and the needs of those students differs and will continue to differ from the needs of students that come fresh out of high school or that come fresh out of an undergraduate program going right into a graduate program. Those needs are going to continue to be significantly different. And to complicate matters, I think, say for the sake of argument, you have a group of traditional, non traditional students. Okay. But within that group, you have multiple subgroups of those non-traditional students that requires um, or special assistance or that relates specifically to their group.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times bestselling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
So whether that has to do with the demographics related to traditional underrepresented groups, whether that has to do with veterans, whether that has to do with seniors, I mean, the list could go on and on.
It is. And I think folks are being asked to do more with less, particularly at regional public institutions where funding is coming into question. But let me narrow in on something you said, President Joe, about the ROI and kind of serving students differently. Stockton has, from what I can tell, a pretty unique online master's of arts in instructional technology. And from what I could see, this program is tailored to bring instructional technologies into public and corporate curricula. It serves students that are looking at roles in pre-K through 12 schools and administration. That would seem to kind of fit the bill of what you're saying. I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about that kind of program at Stockton and where you see that going in terms of opportunity for students.
Well, it's interesting. Ultimately, the goal is to ramp up our K through 12 educators to essentially ensure the success of students before they're even considering the opportunity of post-secondary education. Because we are a public regional, like most public regionals, we train a lot of teachers. And that's what most of our institutions were founded on. Now, Stockton's a little bit different because it's a young institution. It's only a little over 50 years old and was founded on an interdisciplinary curriculum. But the demand for teachers in a post-pandemic world is quite high. A number of folks have left the profession for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which is the demand that was placed on teachers during the pandemic and the challenges their students faced during that time period. And then students coming following the pandemic, their lack of preparedness in returning and moving forward in their educational progression. I I would say that a program like Stockton's in instructional technology is probably needed more now than ever because during the pandemic, everyone was thrown into the classroom virtually. People had to ramp up quickly using technology in some way, shape, or form. Some people were able to pick it up and use it well. Some people simply were not, and it wasn't received particularly well by a lot of students as well. And as a result, some of those students just disappeared or weren't successful. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that experience in terms of what technology is available, what technology do we need, what technology are people trained to do, what technology is most effective, and what technology provides us with maximum flexibility to ensure that our teachers are one supported, are able to deliver the material, and that students are able to receive it and progress at a steady pace. Um, don't ask me what technology any of that is. I am a social worker by training. So I usually ask people, how do you feel? But I understand it enough to know that institutions like Stockton have both an opportunity and a responsibility to train teachers and other educators on the complexities of technology so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation that we were a couple years ago. Because it would be naive to assume that we'll never have to do it again, because we will. And a number of folks want to continue to use the technology or use technology in some way as a result of the pandemic and have become a little bit more comfortable with it. So, how do we ensure that we're doing it well?
That's really interesting too, and it kind of spurs a thought about leveraging technology to enhance learning experiences, whether those are in pre-K through 12 or graduate. Uh, from your experience, how do you address the challenges that you're talking about of digital literacy, of accessibility, particularly when talking about more diverse student populations? What do you see there?
I'm smiling because anytime folks talk about technology, X technology is going to be the end of X educational experience as we know it, or the end of civilization as we know it. I'm always amused by that. If that were the case, this evening I would be walking around campus with a torch, lighting the light poles, and I'd be going out to my carriage. Um, I mean, you know, the technology is going to happen no matter what. I am a child of the late 70s and a teenager and college student of the 80s. I remember vividly the calculator, and that was going to be the end. Even with the calculator, quite frankly, I didn't do particularly well, but that's a whole nother
Me
story.
neither.
I say that because I think one, we just need to acknowledge that this technology is is going to continue to develop. And so we have a responsibility to we can try to ignore it all we want, but someone else, meaning our competitors, are going to utilize the technology in a way that best benefits the students and the individuals they serve. So stop it. Just take it and let's move forward. I think that's my first thought. That's the president in me just saying, let's stop having this conversation and focus on how are we going to use this technology and how is it best going to benefit us. Now, having said that, um, we are building. We're about to engage in a multi-million-dollar project here to renovate and upgrade a library. Now, that is very exciting because all of a sudden we are at the what are we going to do with all these books? The books that most of our students don't touch because everything for them is virtual. And so like other institutions, we have formed robust relationships with platforms all over the world that allow students, regardless of income and socioeconomic status, to be able to have access to multiple resources of information, um, again, from around the world. And they're able to access that information um, just by the click of a button. My biggest concern with all of this is if we don't provide a structure and a plan that allows students to have this access, then students will rather just ignore it entirely and then not have the information they need. Or worse, they will look for information that one may not be accurate, or two is not properly contextualized. I teach a fundamentals of leadership class to primarily first year students. I, there's a book that I love from Susan Comovies and her work on leadership and the relational leadership model. I don't have the students purchase the book because I already know that one, it's expensive, and two, are they going to take the time to utilize it in the way they need to?
And that's so interesting too, because you look at the way graduate students need to use books in
Hmm.
general and how they
Hmm.
need access to the most accurate and recent information, like especially in healthcare. It provides so much more flexibility for those students and value when you think about the cost plus the additional opportunity to update things. I want to kind of close with one final question, and I know at the very beginning you told me not to ask you what the next thing is, but use your presidential crystal ball, if you will, and maybe tell me what you think. What emerging technologies do you believe will be the most significant in terms of their impact on grad education in the next decade?
Well, we all know that it's AI, plain and simple. It's what everybody is talking about, and so I think that technology has the power to create um, some amazing opportunities and amazing uh, sets of information and data. It also can have an opposite effect. So, how we as educational institutions utilize that technology and teach others how to use the technology, I think becomes critical. I'll also share with you that I believe that there should be, and always will be, value um, at the graduate level in healthcare, in mental health, in particular, health and wellness. But let's not sideline the arts and humanities here, because ultimately folks need, because they're constantly bombarded with technology and the quick clip, as I shared earlier, when I teach, I used to have my students watch movies every week. Now it's more like video clips because folks are used to getting information so quickly or absorbing information very quickly, and and the attention span is declining a bit. I think that moving forward, providing access at the graduate level to the arts and humanities becomes critical because we need folks to think critically. We need folks in a world where individuals have stopped listening, have stopped communicating, have perhaps not practiced the art of compromise. And in a world where behind me I have a big sign that says dignity, respect, kindness, compassion, and civility. Those are the pillars by which I work, and the university, I hope, universities that I have led function. How do we use technology to help our students at all levels think, be good citizens, participate, listen, collaborate? All of those things are important. And if we can do that with graduate students, in particular, those graduate students as leaders, as employers, and as potential educators to others will pass that down. And I think that'll be part of their legacy.
I think that's a wonderful answer and a great place to conclude our interview. I really want to thank you again for your insights and your time, President Joe. And I hope that everyone was listening to what you said about the humanities as somebody who studied the humanities as well and feels the same way. So, Dr. Joe Bertolino, President, Stockton University, thank you so much. Mastering the Next podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea, and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Artis Cadieux, J.C. Bonilla, Mallory Wilsey, Brendan Henkel, Brian Gross, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.